All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Joanne, for the coaching.
You're welcome.
Looks like Jens is coming in off the golf course or walking around the swamp, whatever he's been doing. Hey, Jens.
The hot tub.
A hot tub? What, 80 degrees is not hot enough for you guys?
By any other name, a swamp.
So I see people are still joining, but I think to respect that everyone that's here wants to get started and then we can get done, I will start. And first I'll start by saying that for me, typically Sunday evenings are a time to regroup and center before the week comes on. And because there was another event at the church this afternoon, we've pushed this meeting off till the evening. So I want to just acknowledge that this is most likely a sacrifice on your part, time-wise, and I want to thank you for coming. Hopefully it'll be worth your while. And I just want to introduce myself. I'm Don Barber and the chair of the board. And we have a couple other trustees with us. We have Nancy Miller and Margaret Nichols and Simon Cotterill are all trustees as well. The board is making a conscious effort to stay in communication with the congregation to let folks know what we're up to, because there's a lot of transitioning happening around us that we think is important for you to know about. And this is also kind of a follow-up to last month's meeting where we asked you about the qualities and skills that we want in a minister. And it was really very informative to us as we've taken other steps since that time. So I'll just start by saying that this year has been a series of unplanned and challenging events. We started out in the summer hoping that we'd have in-person gatherings at Fawcett, only to have the Delta variant come and push that aside. And then we started getting optimistic, only have the Omicron variant come through. And so it seems like our goal of gathering together as a community just keeps getting pushed back by the virus. And then we were also challenged with things not working out with Reverend Tony, leaving us many to question what was wrong with us and where we're going and what the opportunities are going forward. So the overarching issue for the board on top of all this is trying to develop a governance and operations structure within the partnership governance philosophy that's flexible enough to function without a minister. Because as we look back at our history, we've had typically our church has had ministers for less than 5 years. And so there's always transitions. And for the last 20 some odd years, we've had a short tenures of settled ministers and then a ton of interims around it. So we need a governance model that allows us to continue to operate efficiently whenever we don't have a minister in the pulpit. So the board has developed, thanks to Nancy Miller and John Gaines, a very trusting relationship with staff, and that is serving us, we believe, well. Staff has been very forthcoming with us about things that are important to them, and that's been very helpful for us in the board role to do that. But I will say we have not crossed the line to be the supervisor, and we're trying very hard not to. So we're trying to keep that space available. But there's still more work to be done, and that's part of the reason for getting together. As you may know, if you said in previous meetings, that we have a meeting with Keith Cron in January to learn about minister search opportunities within the UUA. And we shared that video with you so that you would have a chance to know what we had heard as well. And it was quite sobering to learn that last fall, 27 congregations had severed relationships with the minister. Although many of those UUA ministers were retiring, we do know that at this point in time, there are very few ministers entering the field to be ministers. And so Keith advised that there are a very limited number of ministers in search for either a settled or interim search appointment. So this becomes clear to the board that we need to think outside the box. We won't be going through the standard UUA process for the near term to find a minister. So last month, help us figure out what we wanted to do for finding a minister. We asked you, the congregation, to tell us what you valued most in a minister. We got great feedback. And I'll just summarize to say that there were three key roles that the congregation felt were necessary. One is spiritual leadership, and then pastoral care, and then operations oversight. So the board met with Nathan Fawcett, who's chair of the finance committee, and the treasurer on March 2nd to do a deep dive into the budget constraints that we have looking for a minister and managing our staff. And it's very clear that at the levels that the UUA is put forward for guidelines for hiring a full-time minister, we're not able to fund that in the near future. And so this situation takes us out of the UUA search process. And Keith Cron has suggested that search process is not all that promising at any rate. So the board decided that it would charge the governance committee, which is a relatively new committee for Fawcett, to identify partners for the board within the partnership governance that are flexible enough to work when we have a minister, when we don't have a minister, and when we're in transition. And so the governance committee, which both Jens and Preston are on, as well as myself, met shortly after the March 2nd meeting and developing. Hey. And so they, I had a grandson here. Sorry, that's what happens. Whenever you move them across the street from you, you get to see them a lot. So they came up with a governance model that creates two partners for the board. One partner is the ministry visioning team, and the other partner is the operations and administration team. So the ministry vision team consists of 4 people, whose task will be to guide and coordinate the work of the ministry and to serve as a partner with the board to implement the goals articulated in the annual vision of ministry. So this team will guide the team leader council and ensure coordinated efforts across all Fawcett ministry teams. There'll be 4 members of this team that's we envision right now. 1 would be a board member, 2 would be board appointees made in consultation with the team leader council. And the 3rd would either be a staff representation from either the minister or a ministry focused staff person. So this would be one of the partners that the board would partner with in partnership governance. And the charge of that committee, that team would be to guide the implementation of the vision of ministry by coordinating teamwork, report the results of ministry work to the board, and propose annual budget expenditures to support the ministry work. So then there's another team that would be for the board to work with another partner, and that's the operations administration team. And that'll also be consisted of 4 persons. And they don't have to be all different persons, although we'd like to spread it around as much as possible. And their role would be to oversee the administration of the church operations. It will also advise a supervisor of paid staff and review their work annually. It will also be responsible for recommending the hiring and firing of paid staff members and should the need arise. It will also oversee spending and make budget recommendations. So this committee, we have 4 members, which include the board treasurer, 2 board appointees, and a staff representation from the minister or a congregation administrator. The charge would be to guide and coordinate the work of the paid staff, coordinate searches for new staff, to recommend hiring and firing of staff members to the board, and provide input on the creation of annual budgets. And to evaluate paid staff's work, report those reviews to the board at least annually. So the board met last Wednesday, and the board accepted this proposal, fully recognizing that the players are not named. There are many decisions to be made to have these teams come to fruition, and the roles of our current staff deserve a relook under this model. So this model is important to know whenever we are interviewing prospects for the full-time minister or part-time minister. And so they would know where they would fit in, if there is a support structure that they'd be moving into. So that said, I want to just be clear that the board does not view this as an austerity measure at all. Rather, it creates a number of opportunities for us. And it creates the opportunity to be flexible whenever there are transitions going about on the ministry side. So the FUSA could hire a part-time minister to provide spiritual leadership and pastoral care, while operations oversight could be handled by a congregational administrator or an executive director or chief operations officer or something like that. So there are ways to divide the job up the ministers had in the past, if that would make it work better. The board is not married to any particular option, but we're creating different opportunities going forward. So to coordinate this work of finding this minister, last Wednesday, the board created the Ministerial Fulfillment Committee. And this committee would advise the board on fulfilling the ministerial responsibilities and service to the congregation. So this committee then would be charged with developing and implementing a timeline and plan for including to include the committee's work. And it would also, and we would be informed by the new organizational structure that we just talked about. Would also be informed by the congregational priorities, which we mentioned as well, of spiritual leadership and pastoral care and operations administration. And would also be guided by the financial considerations that Walt Peck laid out in the last congregational conversation. So this team would also be flexible enough, have the flexibility to develop responsibilities and description for the minister fulfillment by creating advertisement for the position, recruiting candidates, interviewing candidates, and recommending one or more candidates to the board. So this is a new way to search for ministers. We're not in the timeline that the UUA has for interim or for settle minister search, but we feel it's important that we be looking for spiritual leadership at this time. And so this creates that opportunity. So my role tonight then is to update you, our community, on the thinking and actions of the board who works to the best of their abilities on your behalf. And recognizing that what the board accomplished on Wednesday was more about creating directions than it was taking action. We know that there are many blanks to fill in and many questions without answers. So having said that, part of the reason for tonight's congregational conversation is for you to ask questions and for us to be more aware as we start to fill in the blanks and put things together. So I also want to announce that the board is looking for members to sit on this ministerial fulfillment committee. And we envision this committee having a relatively intense but short duration. This is a liminal moment for Fawcett. This committee has an opportunity to set us on a course of rebuilding our community, bringing spiritual leadership back to the pulpit, and providing guidance and cohesion for the church staff function. Which reminds me that the Personnel Committee will be working with this Ministerial Fulfillment Committee and staff to review and amend necessary staff job descriptions to fit this new structure. So I hope you all give serious consideration to serving on the Ministerial Fulfillment Committee. We'd love to have, we want folks from the community, from our community to serve on it. and we're not trying to make this board heavy. As a matter of fact, we only are looking at one board member to be a liaison back to the board. So now I'm going to take a breather from talking and hopefully that it's giving you a chance to assimilate much of what I've mentioned. And I'm ready to take questions, and also Nancy and Margaret and Simon are on to help out with questions that you might have or thoughts. So you can either use a virtual hand, or if you're on video, you can wave your hand and I'll try to get you and answer your questions. Looks like Olivia's looking for a mute button. No. So Nancy, Margaret, or Simon, do you have anything you want to use to fill in the blanks here? Your thoughts about what's happening?
Well, one thing that I want to add particularly is that we're very aware that these two teams that are going to be created need to be very aware of what each other is doing, so that the right hand and the left hand will know what's going on. And so the communications committee, which Margaret is chair of, will be working with those two teams to figure out what's the best way for them to communicate, and what's the best with each other, and then for the best way for them to communicate with the board, and the best way for them to communicate with the congregation, not the least of all here. Margaret, you may have more to say, but that's.
I'll just pick up on that comment. I've had several conversations with Dan Hotchkiss, who is the author of Governance and Ministry, and is the one that was kind of the Bible for the partnership governance model. And he always says that communication is the key to making partnership governance work. So Nancy is spot on raising that point.
And the two committees, Nancy, you're referring to are the operations and the
Ministry visioning.
visioning, and those two committees are what you're referring to.
Yes, that's what I'm referring to. Not, well, the minister, and we're also, the communications committee actually has been charged in the minister fulfillment committee resolution to work with that committee also, in terms of making sure that they're communicating with the board and with the congregation as things move on. Am I right about that?
You are.
We did a lot last Wednesday.
We did.
So it's a lot to keep straight about what's what committee and what team is what. But yes. So if anyone wants to help on communications committee, we'd welcome more people. Good, Joanne, go ahead.
I listened to Keith Cron's conversation with the board and found it very enlightening, but not very optimistic in terms of trying to find a minister. So your thought of having a ministerial search team and saying it's not a long-term commitment, that doesn't seem to gel well with what I heard Keith say. And particularly based on our history of, not having been able to find, through, 2 or 3 different iterations, a transitional minister or interim. I forget which one Tony was, but it seemed to be a long-term process. And I just, from what Keith said, it doesn't sound very optimistic about finding a minister who wants to come to Ithaca, New York, which I can't understand that, but obviously people, find other geographic locations to be a little more desirable.
So Joanne, I'll just speak to your question, which is a very fair question. It is possible to go through a search process and not be successful. And the staff may remember the last meeting we had mentioned that they would rather not have a minister that is not functioning well than as opposed to one that's not functioning well. So we fully expect that we may not be successful, and we will learn what candidates are out there and what they're looking for, and then we can readjust as we go forward. The other thing that's been very interesting is we've had several outstanding presenters this fall and winter at Fawcett, and members of our congregation have self-appointed themselves to speak to those ministers and talk to them about maybe coming and speaking more often. And we have heard reports back that several of them are entertained and are seriously considering if that were to come about, doing something like that. So I think there's reason for optimism that there are spiritual leaders within our community that may be wanting to work, but they may not be wanting a full-time job, because that is a big job. They may already have other responsibilities or interests. And so this model that we're talking about allows that type of flexibility. And because the ministry fulfillment team does not have a specific job description that it's working from, it allows them to work with the board and staff to come up with something that can work. And that's the creative part about this that I think is so exciting.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, Don, that I think Keith was speaking only about, going with an official interim through the UUA, whereas I think that's essentially off the cards at this point, it looks like. So we're looking at something, the pool is much broader, but different. We don't really know how broad and deep it really is at this point. But there's reasons for optimism, I guess.
So you're talking about a part-time minister who may not be a UU minister?
Yes.
It's entirely possible that they wouldn't be, but at the same time, there is a pathway for them to become a UU minister while they're serving at our church. And both Keith and Renee Wachowski, who you may have seen in the past, that's been helping our congregation, both have mentioned that to us, that there is a possibility if we find someone that's does not have a UUA certification coming into this. But I see Madonna. Go ahead, Nancy. Then I'll.
Well, yeah. Let me just say something briefly. In addition to that, is that we need this team to also investigate. There are other congregations in our area that UU congregations that are looking for a part-time minister, and if we could hitch on with that and hire a full-time minister between the two of us that would serve two different churches, or there may be a bunch of different options. One of them would be to have a minister that would fulfill part of those three: the spiritual leadership, pastoral care, and operations administration, and maybe split off the operations administration totally for the time being. But what we're looking for is just for this year, it's just for next year. And we'll start all over again next year in terms of reevaluating where we are. I'm going to let Madonna talk, but we also might talk a little bit about finances.
Hey, Madonna, please.
Well, I'm just kind of interested. I agree with what Joanne says, but also that kind of reiterates in my mind what I came away from the last conversation. There was in my mind, there was a very strong feeling. I'm trying to lower my hand there. Okay. There was this very strong feeling from congregants that, and it was even said a couple of times that with the writing on the wall, 27 congregations are without a minister and looking, and getting a part-time minister is even harder, or an interim minister is even harder. There was sentiments shared at that meeting that searching for a minister right now is just kind of a waste of time. And Don, correct me if I'm wrong, but I didn't hear you share that part of the community conversation. Did anybody else hear those words or walk away from that conversation feeling like the search for a minister is something we shouldn't be focusing on, but more us focusing on how we as a congregation should be ministering to one another? That's really the summary of what I walked away with from that conversation. And so I'm wondering if I was at a different meeting or if anybody else felt that same way.
Thank you, Madonna, for sharing that. I will say that Keith Kahn's comment about settled interim and part-time minister are from the minister pool within the UUA. And so but they have absolutely no issue with us looking outside the UUA for minister. And we have learned from other congregations that they're being quite creative in where they're finding minister support. And also Keith did mention in that same interview that we had that it is possible for a minister who comes to us that doesn't have UUA certification to gain that while they're working with us. So I think there are options out there, and I couldn't agree more that that in order for us to be a good partner with us as a Fuchsia Society, to be a good partner with a minister, we need to be able to take care of ourselves. And I know whenever we were working through the interim process with Ms. Thixton, we became pretty good about taking care of ourselves. She was a great coach for us and made us a strong partner when we were looking for Reverend Margaret. And I think that's part of what attracted Reverend Margaret to the congregation. And so we have that work to do for sure. I don't think you were in the same, I think we were at the same one, Madonna, but thanks for bringing up what you carried forward from that. So that's important to hear. Jen, you have a statement.
Yes,
question.
I just wanted to react to you, Madonna, about it being a waste of time. I don't think it's a waste of time because it's not something we're doing in serial process. We're not doing one thing and then the other and then the other, but looking for what are the possibilities doesn't change the fact that there are a bunch of us on the celebrations committee that are looking to do that as long as we have to. We're the group that when Reverend Tony departed, we jumped in, and there's been somebody in the pulpit every Sunday. So I think that that's something else that's part of it. I think we're already doing it, and it would be really nice to have another leader to help us.
Thank you, Jens. Nathan.
Don, if I heard you correctly earlier in this discussion, one of the primary reasons for creating the two standing committees, the new ones, the visioning one and the operations one, is to see us through times of transition, and therefore we're much better positioned, it would seem to me, to deal with a search that doesn't succeed right away, or to deal with a couple of years that might be required to find the right person in the end. And I think that's important to keep in mind. So to me, that makes it not a futile effort to search, I think it strengthens our position to continue to minister to ourselves while we're searching.
And that's a good point, Nathan. Thanks for bringing that up. And it really would resonate with Reverend Tony when he came. If we had these teams in place, he could have been much more effective. But whenever he was asked to essentially pick up where Reverend Margaret had left off, and there was no playbook left behind, and there was really no transition with her, it made it very difficult. So these two teams working in partnership with the board creates that infrastructure for a minister to come in and be successful. So thank you.
And do you see that them continuing even if we were to hire, let's just say optimistically, best case, ultimately a full-time minister? Would we want to keep those two teams in place?
My personal philosophy is yes, because when you go back and look at our history, what is the strength of Fawcett is our congregation. And the ministers are accessories and they're coaches and they can be inspirational, but they're not Fawcett. And we've had ministers come and ministers go, but the congregants, many of them stay on for life. And so we should recognize their strength and provide them with the resiliency should change come. And this would do that. And as I mentioned earlier, I think that having these teams would make us very attractive for a minister.
Thank you.
And I think that, when we think back at Mark Peterson, he was definitely administrative partner for a minister. And so any minister that was coming in, the interims and so on, he was there to support them and have them be as successful as they were. And so we need to, I think this provides some of that structure going forward, and it'd be more permanent and flexible. So I see two hands now, Joanne and then Nancy. So Joanne, you're on first.
I was wondering about a moderator. I don't know exactly what that is, but in reading Widening the Circle of Concern, they mention a position. I happen to be in the governance chapter, a president/moderator. And I know that some congregations have just a moderator. So I don't know what that is or how that fits in, if it does at all, with our particular congregation.
So Joanne, I'm going to communicate with you via email to try to learn more about that, because I'd love to know what other options are out there.
Oh,
So thank you.
okay.
Nancy.
Well, I was going to say, in response to Nathan particularly, is that if we were to have a full-time minister, that minister could be on both of those teams.
Exactly.
And so would be the glue. I mean, that I think was seen as the piece, but also that the minister, I mean, ministers, as we learned from Keith Cron, have very little administrative training. They have some, but very, very little in their seminary. And so for them to have both some support on the operations administration side and some support on the more traditional ministry side, the creating the spiritual leadership, the community building, pastoral care, all of that, which, we may be doing a little more overkill, but we sort of feel like we undersupported Reverend Margaret. And so we want to build that in.
Thank you, Nancy. Other questions or thoughts? Because as I mentioned, this is uncharted territory for all of us, and we're trying to feel our way through it. But we recognize that whenever Reverend Margaret left, there were some big holes in our operations that we need to find a way so that that we can fill them and then be resilient going into the future. Barbara.
I wondered when you're looking for these committees, is the board going to appoint? Or are you waiting for people to volunteer, or how is that going to go forward?
So that's a great question, Barbara. The board has the responsibility to appoint. But volunteers are always appreciated because we know that they're willing to, they're planning to put the energy in. But I think it was Elton Hall, who's a trustee, said at the last meeting that when folks are approached by a board member or someone, and ask specifically if they're interested, then that lifts up their spirits, and oftentimes they will volunteer. So it's a mix for sure of how we're going to
Okay.
find people. And we realize there's a lot of committees and teams already, and so many people are volunteering on more than one slot. And so this is, I know whenever I served on a Settlement Minister Search Committee that I was relieved of having to be on other committees because they felt that that's where I should be focusing my energy. We have to consider something similar to that, probably for someone that's people that are on the ministry visioning team and the operations administration team. Those will be pretty heavy lifts. We're also, I guess I should point out that we have looking for term limits on those committees. So it's not going to be a lifetime sentence. And so there is some changeover on a regular basis. And that provides the depth of understanding within the congregation going forward. Having said that, I see Brian's hand up. So Brian, jump in, please.
Hi there, Don. I just wanted to thank you and the board and everybody who's involved in this for charting a way forward and specifically for holding this this meeting. My one suggestion / question is whether in the course of doing this for the benefit of us visual learners, if anyone has come up with a diagrammatic explanation of where we were and where we are. And I fully realize that sometimes can be too reductive since people are not boxes and circles. We have much rougher edges. But that, for me anyway, that would confirm or refute my mental model of what you decided to do, which on the face of it sounds like an entirely rational and in fact necessary way in order to make any progress whatsoever. So thanks.
So Brian, that is a great question. And I was probably remiss in not having that ready on my screen. But we did have such a model, a visual put together for the board, and it would be possible to share with our community. And so let me work with Michelle to find a way to do that. I think that's a great suggestion and would allow folks to then engage off a visual. So thank you. Joanne, I see your hands up. I'm glad you're participating in this conversation here. That's great.
I don't know if this is true or not, if a congregation can have a lay minister or lay person, I guess it wouldn't be called a lay minister, a lay person leading a congregation without having a minister in place.
If we had Walt Peck here, he'd jump in right now to tell you that
Okay.
we are associated with the UUA, but we are not, but they don't direct us. So if we can do whatever we want to do. Whenever Keith Cron and both Reverend Keith Cron and Reverend Renee Wachowski talked about that type of approach to us, they were concerned that we would find someone who's may have less than the best values and moral intent that could be looking for someone to prey upon and to keep our eyes wide open, because the UUA vets all that out. And I completely understand and appreciate that. And that would be something that we always do, background checks on anyone that comes to work with us. And so we would handle that. That was our only caution, and we're not restricted by the UUA and looking for a person that does not have a UUA certification. As I mentioned earlier, it is possible for someone to come to our church and that we could work with them, help them get their certification, and it's possible to do while they're in service. Any other thoughts? Oh, I see, Liz, you're clapping your hands, but I'll take it as a raised hand, so good for you.
A couple months ago, Jody Kessler spoke at our church, and people seemed to really enjoy her content and her style. And so I talked, and another person talked to her afterward to see if she might be interested in doing something temporarily or whatever. And then I asked somebody at on the board to discuss that. Do you know if that's ever been looked at, or has she been contacted?
Well, she has not been contacted because we were trying to get to this point in the process that we are right
Okay.
now. And then the ministerial fulfillment team would be available to contact her. I will say that her name and about a half a dozen others have come forward at the board meetings of folks from our community that have resonated with different members of our congregation to reach out to. And so that's why I feel optimistic that we will find spiritual leadership with in the not too distant future. And Jody's name is on that list, along with some others.
Thank you.
Sure. Madonna.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I say this before everybody leaves. I just want to, I guess it was, I'm sorry, the gentleman who spoke and expressed his gratitude. I would also like to express my gratitude to the board. I've just been very, very impressed with the dedication from the people on the board and the amount of time and everything that you have put in behind the scenes. I mean, if a person wants to find out how much time and how much energy our board, our directors are putting into things, you can find that out, and you don't have to look very far. And I want you to know that I see things that you are doing, and I really appreciate all the time and devotion you guys are putting into our community. The other thing I want to say, Jens, you mentioned the celebration associates. I am just astounded at the quality of speakers that you have brought in. I really, really am. And keep it up. If you can, keep it up. Thank you very much. And all of the people you have had are just very life enriching to sit and listen to what they have to say. And I really appreciate all the work you guys have put into that. That's all.
Thank you, Madonna. Everybody's putting in a lot of energy to keep this Fawcett running as successfully as it is. There are many teams pulling their weight, and I know Nancy would correct me if I didn't say something about our staff that has really put in the extra mile without a minister and so on. So we as the board feel buoyed by all the support around us. And thank you for those comments, Madonna.
Well, and I also want to say that we have a lot of support, not only from you all, but also from the governance committee that put together this new model that we're looking at, the personnel committee that's working hard to try and look at all the things that have been not quite up to snuff around personnel. And Michelle has been doing a yeoman's job here of really looking at
Yes.
every single corner of our administration stuff and making sure that we're up to date and legal and all of that, and taking that to the personnel committee. And that the other and celebrations, of course, has been doing an amazing job. So we have a lot of support from other people. And finance. I mean, Walt as treasurer, Nathan working with the finance committee and the endowment committee, and Matt Hare on stewardship. You know, it's all teamwork, and I'm astonished. Every month, the board gets a report from all the committees and teams, and we read every one of those, and it's astonishing the amount of work that's getting done by each of the various teams and committees, the dedication and all of that. So yeah, so want to thank everyone for that.
And I'll just pick up, Barbara, and then I'll let you speak. I'll just pick up on Nancy's comment that when the board meeting is put into the weekly announcements, there's also a link to the agenda that we're working on and the committee reports that come out. So it's possible for congregants to follow all that activity as well. Barbara.
I agree with everything that you're saying about how wonderful the progress has been that you have made. However, just to throw in something that bothers me, there are a lot of people who were coming who I haven't seen, and I'm wondering if there's an outreach for people who are not following what's going on, and they need to be informed and encouraged to come back. Am I wrong? I mean, people I haven't seen.
Barbara, you speak to something that the board's been concerned about and discussed for meeting after meeting, and we are making some progress. The outreach is taking place by stewardship as we speak. They're reaching out to people and letting them know what's happening. And stewardship has been following the board meetings and so on. So there is that outreach is taking place. And I will say that on the side of transparency, that the board will be, or the ministerial fulfillment team will be in contact with the congregation regularly throughout the spring as we work our way through this transition, so that folks know where we are, because we're looking for some confidence and in our direction as we head into the summer.
Okay.
Nathan.
Don, I, like many of us, would echo what everybody said about the amount of effort that all of you have been putting in and that the team's been putting in. But I want to be more specific and say to thank you personally for the leadership and the direction and the momentum that has developed in the last couple of months. It's made the difference in my view, and I think you get accolades for that from me.
Thank you, Nathan. I'll just say that I asked the same of all the board members, and they've been kicking in to do their part. So it's been a team effort.
Yep.
Thank you for sure.
Another name that I want to bring up in terms of a bunch of the structure stuff, or at least putting it into workable resolutions and explaining it to the rest of the board members, has also been John Gaines. He's also been doing an amazing amount of work along with Don.
And Nancy and Margaret and Simon. And we have Liz has her hand up. She's not applauding this time, so I'm not sure what that means. Hey, Liz.
Well, those other times were applauding what everybody said about the wonderful board we have. But I just want to comment on Barbara's comment. If we're missing people, and especially people we know and wish were there, it just takes a phone call. I do that every once in a while when I think, what's wrong with so-and-so or something, and call and find out. And several people I've called are still worried about the pandemic and aren't coming for that reason. But I think personal calls
Mhm.
are really the way.
Mhm.
Amen.
Agreed, Elizabeth. That was part of one of the keys for political campaigns, is to make the personal
Yeah.
contact. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Sorry you missed 60 minutes, but maybe you recorded that.
Also
right.
the tennis,
Sure.
which I have on mute.
All right. Well, thanks for focusing with us on Barbara, for sure. So I'll just close by again thanking you for taking time out on a Sunday evening to speak with us and to listen to what we have to say. And as you process this, you have questions, please feel free to ask. This is all uncharted territory, so if you see something that we should know about or be thinking about, that's what we want to learn from you. All right. So thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you so much. Thank
Have a
you
good
so much.
evening.